Imagine working yourself to the bone for 3 years in a foreign country, missing birthdays, missing holidays, missing the small ordinary moments of your own life, all because you believed in something. You believed in your marriage. You believed in your best friend. You believed that the people who mattered most to you were holding everything together back home while you sacrificed your comfort, your presence, and your time to build a better future for the two of you. Now imagine stepping off a plane after all of that, dragging your suitcase down the familiar street where you live, seeing the porch light on in your own house, and then looking through the window and realizing in one single, devastating moment that the life you were working so hard to protect no longer exists. That it has not existed for a very long time. And that the two people responsible for dismantling it are sitting on your couch right now, laughing, comfortable, settled, completely unaware that you are standing outside in the cold watching them. That is not a scene from a movie. That is exactly what happened to Rachel. And before this story is over, you are going to understand not just what she saw through that window, but everything that led to it, everything that happened after it, and the extraordinary way she chose to respond to one of the most painful experiences a human being can walk through. Stay with this story. Because the further in you go, the more it is going to stay with you. Before we go any further into Rachel's story, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from right now. Whether you are watching from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Nigeria, Australia, or anywhere else in the world, drop your location below. We would genuinely love to know where our community is tuning in from. And if you are new to this channel and this is the first story you are watching with us, please click the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We tell real, deeply human stories here, stories about love and betrayal and survival and the complicated truths of what it means to trust another person. If that is the kind of content that speaks to you, you are in exactly the right place. Now let us go back to the beginning of Rachel's story, because to truly understand what happened on that cold November night, you have to understand who Rachel was, who Marcus was, and most importantly, who Melissa was, and what that friendship meant before everything fell apart. Rachel grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the second of 3 children in a household that was functional but not particularly warm. Her parents were hard-working people who provided everything their children needed materially and very little of what they needed emotionally. Not because they were cruel, but because that was simply how they had been raised themselves, and they passed on what they knew. Rachel learned early that you handled your feelings quietly and you kept moving. You did not linger on pain. You did not ask for too much. You showed up and you did the work and you earned what you got. Those values shaped her in ways both admirable and limiting, and they would matter enormously to this story later on. She was a good student, methodical and focused, the kind of person who made lists and crossed things off and felt a deep, quiet satisfaction in doing things properly. She chose nursing not because it was glamorous but because it was meaningful and because she was genuinely good at it. She had a steadiness about her in a crisis that her patients responded to and her colleagues relied on. She did not fall apart. She did not panic. She assessed the situation and she acted. That quality, that particular kind of emotional containment, would be tested more severely than she ever imagined. She moved to Columbus in her mid-20s after finishing her nursing degree and took a position in the ICU at a large hospital on the east side of the city. The work was demanding and the hours were long and the learning curve was steep, but Rachel adapted the way she always adapted, by putting her head down and doing the work until it became second nature. She rented a small apartment near the hospital and built a quiet, orderly life. She had a few friends from school who had scattered to different cities. She was not lonely exactly, but she was alone in that particular way that young professionals in new cities often are, surrounded by people and lacking genuine connection. She had been in Columbus for almost 2 years when she met Melissa. Melissa was everything Rachel was not, in the best possible way. She was loud and warm and completely unself-conscious. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. She hugged people she had just met. She had opinions about everything and she shared them freely without being overbearing about it, which is a rarer quality than most people realize. She had grown up in Columbus, knew the city the way only locals do, and had a wide, easy social circle that she navigated with the kind of natural confidence that Rachel had always quietly admired in other people. When they met at a hospital staff birthday party for a coworker neither of them particularly knew well, Melissa had spotted Rachel standing near the edge of the room looking politely engaged but privately exhausted, and she had walked over and said, without preamble, "You look like someone who would rather be anywhere else." "Me too. Let's get food." And that was it. That was the whole beginning of 12 years. They went to a diner 3 blocks from the hospital and stayed for 2.5 hours. They talked about work and family and what they wanted from their lives and which movies had made them cry when they were children and why people put raisins in things when nobody asked them to. It was one of those rare conversations where you realize, about halfway through, that you have found someone who operates on your frequency. Rachel drove home that night feeling something she had not felt in a while, like the city had gotten a little smaller in the best possible way, like she was a little less alone in it. They exchanged numbers at the end of the night and Melissa texted her before she had even gotten back to her apartment. The message said, "Same time next week?" Rachel replied, "Yes." And they did exactly that for the next 11 years. What they built between them was the kind of friendship that becomes structural. The kind that holds parts of your life up without you even realizing it until it is gone. Melissa was there for everything. She was there when Rachel's mother was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer and Rachel had to hold herself together through the treatment while quietly terrified on the inside. She drove 2 hours to sit in the hospital waiting room during the surgery, not because Rachel asked her to but because she knew without being asked that that was where she needed to be. She brought food. She made Rachel laugh during the worst of the waiting. She stayed until the doctor came out and the news was cautiously good. She drove home at midnight and texted Rachel from a rest stop to make sure she was okay. That is who Melissa was. That is the person Rachel trusted with everything she had. And Rachel was there for Melissa in equal measure. When Melissa went through a breakup so painful she could barely get out of bed, Rachel showed up at her apartment on a Friday night with enough food for a week, a stack of movies, and absolutely no intention of leaving until Melissa was ready to be left. She stayed the whole weekend. She listened to everything. She did not offer solutions or silver linings. She just sat with her friend in the difficulty of it, which is the most valuable thing one person can do for another and also, somehow, the thing people do least often. They knew each other's families, each other's histories, each other's fears. They had the kind of shorthand that only comes from years of genuine attention. Melissa knew that Rachel always cried at commercials involving dogs but never admitted it. Rachel knew that Melissa hummed to herself when she was anxious even when she was not aware she was doing it. They knew each other. Truly knew each other. And that is what made what eventually happened so completely devastating. Marcus came into Rachel's life about 3 years after she and Melissa became friends. He was a structural engineer who worked for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, and Rachel met him at a fundraising event for the hospital, one of those formal dinners where everyone is slightly uncomfortable in their clothes and the conversation tends towards safe and predictable topics. Marcus was different in that context. He was quiet in a room full of performative sociability, and Rachel noticed him because he was the only person at the table who seemed genuinely interested in what other people were saying rather than waiting for his turn to speak. They talked for most of the evening. He asked her about her work in the ICU and listened to the answers the way Melissa had listened to her in that diner years earlier, fully, without distraction, like what she was saying actually mattered to him. He called her 2 days later and asked if she wanted to get coffee. She said yes. They dated for 2 years before Marcus proposed, and when he did it was not elaborate or theatrical. He proposed at her kitchen table on a Sunday morning over coffee, looking at her across the table and saying simply, "I want to do this every Sunday for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Rachel said yes before he finished the sentence. She told Melissa that same afternoon, and Melissa screamed so loudly on the phone that Rachel had to hold it away from her ear, and then they were both laughing and then they were both a little bit crying, and it was one of those moments that you file away in the part of your memory reserved for the things that felt most like life being exactly what it was supposed to be. The wedding was small by choice. A botanical garden outside Columbus, on a Saturday in June, with about 60 people and a ceremony that lasted just under 30 minutes because neither Rachel nor Marcus were interested in the theatrical version of commitment. They wanted the real version. Melissa stood at the altar as maid of honor and gave a toast at the reception that people still talked about years later. She talked about Rachel's loyalty and her quietness and the way she loved people without announcing it, and she talked about what it meant to watch your best friend choose a person who actually deserved her. She said Marcus was the luckiest man in that garden. She raised her glass. The whole room raised theirs. Marcus included. And in the photographs from that day, Melissa is grinning in the background of almost every shot, bright and present and happy in a way that looked completely genuine. Because at the time, it was. Here is something important to understand about Rachel and Marcus's marriage, because it matters to what happened later. It was a good marriage. Not a perfect marriage, but a genuinely good one. They respected each other. They made each other laugh. They had the same values around money and family and how to treat people. But they had also, slowly and without noticing it, begun to drift into a kind of comfortable distance. Not hostile distance. Not unhappy distance. Just the quiet, gradual kind of separation that happens between two people who are both working hard and both tired and both assuming that the connection they had is still fully intact because neither of them is actively destroying it. They were good at being in the same house. They were less good, in those later years, at actually being with each other in the deeper sense. Date nights had become less frequent. Conversations had become more logistical. The warmth was still there underneath, but they had both stopped reaching for it as often as they used to. Neither of them identified this as a problem at the time because it did not feel like a problem. It felt like being busy adults in a functioning marriage. That is the thing about slow drift. It rarely feels dangerous until the distance is already vast. When Rachel received the overseas nursing contract, she had been at the Columbus Hospital for 9 years and was well regarded in her department. The contract came through a recruitment agency she had registered with years earlier almost on impulse and then largely forgotten about. It was a 3-year position with a hospital system in Frankfurt, Germany, focused on ICU nursing, and the compensation package was significant enough that Rachel sat with the email for a full day before showing it to Marcus. The numbers, if they could see them through to completion, would clear the remaining balance on their mortgage and give them a financial cushion they had never had. It would change the practical shape of their lives in a permanent way. When she finally showed Marcus the offer, he was quiet for a long time. And then he said, "This is a real opportunity." She said, "I know." He said, "I cannot come with you. My project schedule is booked out for the next 2 years and I am up for a promotion." She said, "I know that too." They sat with the silence of it for a moment. And then Marcus said, "We can do 3 years. We have done hard things before." So they decided. Rachel would go. Marcus would stay. And Melissa, who was the first person Rachel called after they made the decision, said exactly what Rachel needed her to say, "You are making the right choice. I am so proud of you. And I will look out for him. I promise." Everyone took that promise at face value. Because why wouldn't they? Rachel left on a Thursday in February, 3 years before the night she would stand on that sidewalk with her suitcase. The airport goodbye was not dramatic. Marcus held her for a long time. Melissa had come to the airport too, which was the kind of thing Melissa did, and she had brought coffee and a card that made Rachel laugh and cry at the same time. They stood at the security line and said goodbye in the way people say goodbye when they believe fully that the separation is temporary and the reunion is already written. Rachel went through security, turned back once, saw them both standing there watching her, and then walked forward into the 3 years that would change her life in ways none of them could see coming. The first several months of the arrangement were exactly what they had planned for. Rachel settled into her Frankfurt apartment and her new hospital and found the rhythms of a life abroad, different food, different sounds, different colleagues with different accents, but the same fundamental work that she knew how to do and that grounded her. She called Marcus 3 times a week, video calls that usually lasted 40 minutes to an hour. She texted Melissa regularly and they had long voice note conversations when the time difference made actual calls complicated. Melissa sent her care packages twice and Rachel sent back German chocolate and a postcard from every new city she visited on her days off. The connection felt maintained. The trust felt intact. From where Rachel was standing, the plan was working exactly as intended. And it was, for a while. The problem was not that the plan failed all at once. The problem was that it succeeded well enough, long enough, to disguise the ways it was quietly eroding. About 2 months after Rachel left, Melissa texted Marcus to ask if he needed anything from the grocery store because she was going, and the gesture felt natural to her, the kind of thing you did for a friend's husband when your friend was overseas. Marcus said yes, he was out of coffee and a few other basics, and Melissa picked them up and dropped them off. They stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes and talked about Rachel and laughed about something from the past, and it was easy and comfortable and felt exactly like what it was supposed to be, 2 old friends checking in on each other while the person who connected them was away. Nobody thought anything of it. Rachel knew about it because Melissa told her that same evening. She had said, "I dropped groceries off at your house today." Marcus looked tired but okay. And Rachel had texted back 3 heart emojis and a thank you. That was how it started. The visits became more regular over the following months. Once every couple of weeks at first, then once a week. Melissa would stop by on Saturday afternoons and they would drink coffee and talk. Marcus would text her sometimes when something minor went wrong around the house, a light bulb he could not figure out, a pipe that was making a strange sound, nothing that required real help but the kind of thing you reach out about when you are alone in a house and there is nobody there to hear you mention it. Melissa always responded. She always came when she said she would. And because she told Rachel about most of these visits, because the communication was open and the appearances were innocent, nobody stopped to examine the underlying pattern of what was actually happening, which was that 2 people who were both, in their different ways, experiencing loneliness were finding increasing comfort in each other's company. Marcus's loneliness was the quieter kind. He was a contained person by nature and he did not express need easily, but the house was very silent without Rachel in it, and the silences that had felt manageable when she was there felt different when she was gone. He worked his long hours and came home to an empty kitchen and ate dinner in front of the television and went to bed and got up and did it again. He was not suffering dramatically. He was simply alone in a way he had not been in years, and the visits from Melissa were the only part of his week that felt like actual human warmth rather than mere function. Melissa's loneliness was more complex. She had a busy social life on paper but had been going through a period, which she had not fully admitted to anyone including Rachel, of feeling fundamentally unsettled in her own life. She was in her late 30s. Relationships had not gone the way she had imagined they would. She looked at what Rachel and Marcus had, steady and real and grounded, and she felt something she would only much later be honest with herself about feeling, which was a kind of longing. Not specifically for Marcus. For what Marcus represented. For what that house represented. For the version of life that she had not yet managed to build for herself. That is not an excuse for what happened. It is an explanation. And those are different things. 14 months into Rachel's contract, Melissa's lease expired. Her landlord had sold the building and the new owners were converting the units. She had 60 days to find a new apartment in a rental market that had tightened considerably since she had last looked. She mentioned it to Marcus during one of her Saturday visits, not as a request, just as information, the way you share a problem with a friend. And Marcus, without thinking it all the way through, said, "You can stay in the guest room while you look. It is just sitting empty." Melissa said she did not want to impose. Marcus said it was not an imposition, it was a spare room, and it would be better for the house to have someone in it. She said she would only stay a few weeks until she found a place. Marcus said that was fine. And so she moved in. She told Rachel about it, but only partially. She said her lease had ended and she was temporarily between apartments and Marcus had offered the guest room for a few weeks. Rachel had said, "That is so kind of him. And so convenient for you. Are you comfortable there? Melissa had said, very. It is just temporary. Rachel had said, good. I am glad the house is being used. And that was the whole conversation. Short, practical, unconcerning. The kind of exchange that looks completely different in hindsight than it did in the moment. A few weeks became a month. A month became 3. And 3 months became the quiet establishment of a new normal that nobody had explicitly chosen but that nobody had explicitly ended either. Melissa's apartment search became less urgent. There was always a reason to stay a little longer, a good apartment that fell through, a neighborhood she was not sure about, a price point that was too high. The reasons were real enough individually. But collectively they added up to something else. Melissa was not looking for an apartment anymore. She had stopped looking without acknowledging to herself that she had stopped. Her things accumulated in the house slowly, the way possessions do when you stop thinking of yourself as temporary. Her coffee mug claimed a spot in the cabinet. Her running shoes sat by the front door beside Marcus's. Her products filled the bathroom shelf. Her jackets hung in the hallway. The neighbors on the street who had occasionally seen her coming and going stopped registering her presence as unusual because it was no longer unusual. She was simply there. And somewhere in the architecture of all that quiet, gradual normalcy, the boundary between friendship and something else began to dissolve. It did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It happened in the accumulation of evenings together when the house was warm and the world outside was cold and the conversation was easy and the proximity felt natural. It happened in small moments of care and small moments of honesty and the slow, dangerous intimacy that develops between two people who are living in the same space and keeping each other from feeling alone. By the time either of them would have been willing to name what was happening between them, it had already been happening for months. Meanwhile, from her apartment in Frankfurt, Rachel had no idea. She saw what she was shown and she was shown enough normalcy to have no reason to look deeper. Her calls with Marcus were warm enough. Her conversations with Melissa were familiar and comfortable. She was working 12-hour shifts in a foreign country and saving money and counting down the months to the end of her contract and imagining coming home to everything she had left behind. She did not know that what she had left behind had already become something different. She did not know because neither of them told her. And neither of them told her because the truth had grown too large and too complicated to fit into any honest conversation. So they kept it out of the conversations entirely. They chose the omission every single time. And Rachel, trusting them completely, never thought to question what was being left out. 6 months before her contract ended, Marcus called her on a Sunday night and they talked for almost an hour. He told her he was proud of her. He told her he missed her. He said the house felt different lately and he was looking forward to things getting back to normal. He did not say what he meant by different. He did not say what version of normal he was referring to. Rachel heard the words and felt reassured by them and hung up feeling closer to him than she had in months. She told a colleague the next day that she was starting to get genuinely excited about going home. That she could feel the end of it approaching and it made the remaining time feel lighter. Her colleague said, "You must have a really good marriage to have gotten through 3 years of this." And Rachel said, "I really do." 3 weeks before her return, Rachel finished her final shift at the Frankfurt hospital, attended a small farewell gathering her colleagues organized, packed her apartment, and shipped her boxes home. She video-called Marcus and they talked about her return plans. She told him she would let him know when her flight landed but she was thinking of taking a cab straight home and surprising him. He said that sounded good. He said he would have the place looking nice. He sounded slightly strange on the call, something in his voice that Rachel noticed but could not name and attributed to the emotion of the reunion approaching. She did not follow the feeling. She let it go. She had a plane to catch. She landed in Columbus on a Tuesday evening in late November. The air coming out of the terminal was cold and sharp and familiar in the way that only the air of a place you actually belong to can be. She collected her luggage, found a cab, gave the driver her address. She watched the city pass outside the window and felt the particular quality of emotion that comes with long-awaited return. Everything looks both exactly the same and completely fresh at once, because you are seeing it with the accumulated weight of everything you went through while you were away from it. She felt grateful. She felt relieved. She felt ready. The cab turned onto her street. She saw the porch light on from a distance and felt a surge of warmth at the sight of it. She paid the driver, got out, pulled her suitcase onto the sidewalk. The night was quiet. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the block. The air smelled of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. She stood for a moment just taking it in, this familiar street, this ordinary November night, the simple solid fact of being home. And then she looked toward the window. The curtains were not fully closed. There was a gap of maybe 8 or 10 inches, enough to see clearly into the living room. The lamp on the side table was on, the one Rachel had chosen at a furniture store on a Saturday 4 years ago, casting the same warm amber light it always had. The television was on but nobody was watching it. And on the couch, close together in the way that people who are comfortable with each other sit, were Marcus and Melissa. Melissa was saying something and laughing as she said it. Marcus was leaning slightly toward her, listening, and then he laughed too, and the ease of it, the completeness of their comfort with each other in that space, hit Rachel in the chest like a physical force. She stood there. She did not move. Her suitcase handle was still in her hand. Her coat was cold from the outside air. She stood there and she watched through that 8-inch gap in the curtains and she waited for her mind to produce an explanation that was not the one that was forming. She catalogued the details of what she was seeing with the same methodical attention she used in the ICU when she was trying to understand a patient's condition by reading signs. She was assessing. Gathering information. Looking for anything that would allow a different interpretation. And the more she assessed, the more clearly the interpretation resolved into exactly what it was. This was not two friends keeping each other company. This was two people who were entirely at home together. Who had been entirely at home together for a long time. The difference is visible if you know what to look for, and Rachel, who had been watching human behavior in high-stakes situations for years, knew exactly what to look for. She stood on that sidewalk for what she later estimated was about 4 minutes, though it felt much longer. And then she reached into her coat pocket for her house key. Her hands were steady. She was not crying. She was in that very particular state that extreme shock sometimes produces, where the emotions are so large that they temporarily suspend themselves, and what remains in their place is a terrible, lucid calm. She put the key in the lock. She turned it. She pushed the door open and walked inside. The sound of the door changed the entire room in an instant. Marcus looked up from the couch and the color left his face so completely and so immediately that it was almost clinical to observe. Melissa turned and stood in the same motion, so quickly that she knocked the glass on the coffee table and it tipped and spilled and nobody moved to clean it up. The television kept going in the background. Some home improvement show, the sound absurdly normal against the silence that had dropped over everything else like a physical weight. Rachel stood in her own doorway with her suitcase behind her and looked at them both for a moment without speaking. And then her eyes moved slowly around the room, not at the people in it but at the room itself. At the details she had not been able to see from the window. There was a cardigan draped over the armchair near the bookshelf. It was not hers. There was a pair of women's ankle boots near the door, placed with the casual ease of someone who lived there. They were not hers. There was a ceramic mug on the side table with a lipstick mark on the rim. Not her lipstick. And there was a framed photo on the bookshelf that she had never seen before. She walked toward it slowly and looked at it. It was Melissa and Marcus at what appeared to be a summer barbecue, both smiling, both relaxed, the body language between them easy and unguarded in the way that people are easy and unguarded when they feel completely at home. Rachel looked at the photo for a long moment. Then she looked at Melissa. And she said, in a voice that was very quiet and very even, "How long have you been living here?" Nobody answered. Rachel said it again, the same tone, the same volume, but slower. How long? Marcus looked at the floor. Melissa looked at Marcus. And then Marcus said, in a voice so low it was almost inaudible, about a year. Rachel stood with that for a moment. 1 year. For 1 year, her best friend had been living in her house, sleeping in her guest room, placing her boots by her front door, putting her photograph on her bookshelf, drinking coffee from her cabinet, building a life in the space that was supposed to be waiting for her. For 1 year. She put her coat on the hook by the door. She sat down in the armchair, moving the cardigan to the side first. She said, "Sit down, both of you." And they did. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment with the words, "I am still here." Let us see who is truly following this story all the way through. What followed over the next several hours was one of the most difficult conversations Rachel had ever sat through, and she had sat through some very difficult conversations in her professional life. It was not a screaming match. There were no thrown objects, no slammed doors, no theatrical exits. It was quiet and grinding and relentless, the way truly painful conversations are when the people having them have decided to be honest rather than defensive. Marcus talked first, haltingly at first, then more fully. He described the loneliness of the first months after Rachel left, the way the house had felt to him, the gradual shift in his relationship with Melissa from friendly visits to something he could not clearly name at first and then could but did not stop. He said, "I know that does not explain it. I know that is not enough." Rachel said, "It is not. Keep going." And he did. Melissa talked next. She was less composed than Marcus. Her voice broke several times. She talked about moving in and telling herself it was temporary and then watching the temporary become permanent without ever making a single clear decision for it to be that way. She said, "I told myself every week that I was going to find a place. And then I would tell myself one more week was okay. And then another. And I kept telling myself that nothing serious had happened yet. That there was still a line I had not crossed. And then there was not a line anymore." Rachel listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not soften her expression to comfort them. She listened because she needed to understand the full shape of what had happened, every detail and every sequence, before she could decide anything at all about what came next. And then Marcus said there was something else. He said it the way people say things they have been carrying for a long time and are about to set down whether they are ready to or not. He said, "There is something else that you need to know." His voice changed on that sentence in a way that made Rachel's body respond before her mind did, a slight tightening in her chest, a sharpening of attention that was almost physical. She looked at him and waited. He said, "Melissa is pregnant." The room was very quiet. 4 months. The room stayed very quiet. "The baby is mine." Rachel did not react immediately. She sat with it in the way she had sat with everything else that evening, assessing it, letting it settle into the full picture of what she was understanding. And then she said, with the same terrible steadiness she had maintained since she walked through the door, "Is there anything else?" Marcus shook his head. There was nothing else. But there was also, in that room at that moment, nothing left of the life Rachel had been living for the past 3 years except the truth of it, which was that it had not been the life she thought it was. The marriage had not been what she believed. The friendship had not been what she trusted. And the future she had been working toward, the one that was supposed to begin now, with the mortgage cleared and the contract finished and everything finally settled, that future did not exist in the form she had imagined it. She asked Melissa to leave. Quietly and with no additional commentary. Melissa gathered a few things, a bag, her coat, her keys, and she went to the door. She paused at the threshold and turned back and started to say something, and Rachel said, "Not tonight." Melissa left. The door closed. And Rachel sat alone with Marcus in the quiet of the house that had, without her knowledge or consent, become someone else's home while she was gone. They talked for another 2 hours. Marcus did not try to minimize or justify. He had apparently made some decision, somewhere in the preceding months or perhaps in the preceding minutes, that when this moment came he would meet it with complete honesty, and he did. He answered every question Rachel asked, and she asked many. She wanted to understand the timeline in precise detail. She wanted to know when the visits became more than visits, when Melissa moved in, when the nature of their relationship changed. She wanted to know if there had been any moment when either of them had considered telling her. Marcus said there had been many moments. He said neither of them had been able to find a way to do it that felt survivable. Rachel said, and lying to me for a year felt survivable. Marcus did not have an answer for that. Because there was not one. What Rachel felt during that conversation is difficult to describe in any simple way because it was not any simple thing. It was multiple things occupying the same space simultaneously, the way serious injuries sometimes are. There was grief, real and physical, the kind that sits in the throat and the sternum and makes breathing slightly harder than it should be. There was anger, not the explosive kind but the cold, deep kind that burns slowly and does not exhaust itself quickly. There was a staggering sense of disorientation, of having the familiar become suddenly strange, of not being sure what she could trust about her own understanding of things anymore. And underneath all of it, the thing she would later identify as the most painful of the layers, was loss. The loss of the friendship. Not just of the marriage, which was a loss she could orient herself around because it had a clear shape and a clear cause, but of the friendship, which had no replaceable equivalent, which had been built over 12 years out of genuine care and genuine history and which was now, simply and permanently, gone. Rachel spent that night in her own house because it was late and she was exhausted and she had no intention of being the one to leave. She slept in the bedroom, alone. She did not sleep much. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house and tried to locate herself within the new reality of her situation. She was 41 years old. She had just completed 3 years of hard work overseas in pursuit of a future that no longer existed. Her marriage was over in all but the legal paperwork. Her best friend had been living with her husband for a year. There was a baby coming. None of this was what she had planned. None of this was what she had been working toward. And yet here it was. The actual shape of things, stripped of every comfortable assumption she had been making. She got up before dawn and made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky begin to lighten. The backyard was familiar, the shape of the fence, the old oak tree at the back, the bird feeder Marcus kept stocked every winter. All of it exactly the same as she remembered. All of it somehow entirely different. She drank her coffee and she did not cry and she thought about what came next. She called her sister that morning, her older sister Donna, who lived 40 minutes outside Columbus and who had always been the person Rachel called when the situation was too serious for anyone else. Donna listened to the whole story without interrupting, which took considerable self-control because Donna was not by nature a person who listened without responding. When Rachel finished, there was a pause and then Donna said, "Pack a bag. Come here." Rachel said, "I just got home." Donna said, "Pack a bag." Rachel packed a bag. She spent the first 2 weeks at Donna's house, sleeping in the spare room, helping with her niece and nephew in the mornings, going for long runs in the afternoons. She called her hospital department head and arranged to delay her return to work by 3 weeks, citing personal circumstances. She did not tell anyone at work what had happened. She was not ready for the version of the story that involved other people's reactions to it. She was still too much inside it to have perspective on how to present it to anyone who was not Donna. She texted Melissa once, just to say, "I need space right now. Please do not contact me." Melissa replied, "I understand. I am so sorry." Rachel read the message and put her phone down and did not think about it again that day. She thought about Marcus constantly, but not in the way you might expect. She was not consumed by anger at him, though the anger was present. She was consumed by the effort of trying to understand, genuinely understand, how a person she had trusted completely could have maintained such a thoroughgoing deception for so long. She thought about the phone calls. The video calls where he had sat in that living room with Melissa's boots by the front door and Melissa's photograph on the shelf and told Rachel he missed her and was proud of her and could not wait for her to come home. She thought about the Sunday night call 6 months ago where he had said the house felt different lately. Different. That was the word he had used. And she had heard it and processed it and moved on because she had no framework within which to understand what it actually meant. She had been given a piece of the truth and no map for reading it. That thought would circle back to her for months. 3 weeks after she arrived at Donna's, Rachel found a therapist. Her name was Dr. Patricia Osei, a woman in her 50s with a calm, precise intelligence that Rachel responded to immediately. She had expected therapy to feel like being advised. It felt instead like being asked very good questions by someone who genuinely wanted to understand your answers, not to evaluate them but to help you understand them yourself. Dr. Osei did not tell Rachel what to feel or what to do. She asked Rachel what she noticed when she was alone. She asked what parts of the situation generated the most energy in her, meaning the most emotion, whether anger or grief or fear or something else. She asked Rachel what she had wanted her life to look like, independently of Marcus, independently of the plan, independently of every external expectation she had built her choices around. And Rachel found, sitting in that office on a Tuesday afternoon, that she did not have a clear answer. She had been so thoroughly oriented around the plan, around the structure, that she had not asked herself the underlying question in a very long time. That was its own revelation. Not the betrayal itself, which was clear and terrible and something she could work with, but the realization that underneath the betrayal was a question she had been avoiding. Who was she outside of the structure she had built? What did she want, not instrumentally, not as a means to an end, but simply as the thing that was true of her? She did not know. And the not knowing, after everything else, was almost the most disorienting thing. She moved into her own apartment 6 weeks after returning to Columbus. A 2-bedroom on the north side of the city, close to a park she had always liked and a coffee shop she had gone to before she left for Germany. It was smaller than the house and entirely hers. She furnished it slowly, choosing each piece with a deliberateness that felt meaningful. She was not recreating what she had. She was starting from the actual current state of her life and building forward from there, which is harder than it sounds when you have spent years building in a direction that has now changed. She went back to work. Her ICU colleagues were glad to have her back and did not push for details about the personal circumstances that had delayed her return. She slid back into the rhythms of the work with relief. The work was clear. The work had rules and protocols and outcomes you could measure. The work was the most reliably solid thing in her life during that period and she was grateful for it. She filed for divorce 5 months after she came home. By that point she had been back in therapy for several months and had done enough of the internal work to know that the filing was not an act of anger but an act of clarity. The marriage had ended. The paperwork was simply catching up to the reality. Marcus did not contest anything. The process was handled by lawyers on both sides and involved a minimum of direct communication between Rachel and Marcus, which was what they both needed at that point. The divorce was finalized 4 months after she filed. She received a text from Marcus the day it was finalized that said, "I am sorry, Rachel. For all of it." She read it and thought about it for a long time and then did not respond. She was not ready to respond to that yet. Maybe she would be eventually. Maybe she would not. She did not force herself to know. Melissa had her baby in April. A girl. Rachel found out from a coworker who mentioned it in passing, clearly not aware that the information carried the weight that it did. Rachel thanked her for telling her and went into the supply room for about 5 minutes and stood very still. And then she went back to work. She did not call Melissa. She did not send anything. She sat with the information for several weeks, bringing it to therapy, turning it over in her mind, trying to understand what she felt about the existence of this child and what it meant for the shape of her life going forward. The baby was an innocent person. The baby had not chosen any of this. The baby was also the most concrete imaginable evidence of everything that had happened while Rachel was trusting the wrong people from 3,000 miles away. Both of those things were true simultaneously, and she had to find a way to hold them both. What helped her, eventually, was something Dr. Osei said in a session about 6 months after Rachel had started seeing her. She said, "The question is not whether you can separate this child from what happened. The question is what you want the presence of that knowledge to do in your life. Whether you want it to be something you carry as weight or something you set down." Rachel said, "Setting it down feels like letting them off the hook." Dr. Osei said, "Setting it down is something you do for yourself. It has nothing to do with what they deserve." That distinction took a long time to actually mean something to Rachel. But it eventually did. 8 months after she came home, after the divorce was final and she was established in her apartment and beginning, slowly, to feel like herself again in a way that was not contingent on the life she had lost, Rachel reached out to Melissa. She sent a text that said, "I would like to meet. Not to reopen things. I have something I want to say." Melissa replied within minutes, "Yes. Whenever you are ready." They arranged to meet at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning. It was a place neither of them had ever been to together, which Rachel had chosen deliberately. She did not want to do this in a place that carried shared memories. She wanted neutral ground. Melissa arrived first. She was sitting at a corner table when Rachel came in, and she was holding the baby. Rachel had not expected that, and she paused just inside the door for a moment before continuing to the table. She sat down. She looked at the baby, who was about 4 months old by then, awake and looking around with the mild curiosity of a person who has not yet decided whether the world is interesting or not. Rachel looked at her for a moment and then looked at Melissa. Melissa looked different. Not dramatically different, not aged or diminished in the way people sometimes look after a long difficult period, but quieter. The particular brightness that had always been Melissa's most distinctive quality was still there, but it was lower, the way a dimmer switch reduces light without eliminating it. She did not smile when Rachel sat down, which was the right instinct. She waited. Rachel said, "You can go first if you want." Melissa shook her head. She said, "I want to hear what you came to say." Rachel had been thinking about what she wanted to say for weeks. She had written it down and revised it and eventually put the paper away because she did not want it to sound rehearsed. She wanted it to sound true. She said, "I spent a long time being angry at you. And I think I am going to be angry at parts of this for a long time still. I do not want to pretend that is not true." Melissa nodded. Rachel continued, "But I also spent a long time thinking about who you were to me before any of this happened. And I do not want to lose that. Not because I forgive everything. I do not know if I do yet. But because I refuse to carry hatred into the life I am trying to build. That is not something I am willing to do." She paused. "I am not saying we go back to what we were. We cannot. What we were does not exist anymore. But I am not going to let what happened make me someone who walks through the world with that kind of weight. I am putting it down. Not for you. For me." Melissa cried. She did not try to speak for a moment. When she did, she said, "I have replayed so many moments over the last year where I could have stopped it. Where I should have stopped it. And I did not. And I know that saying I am sorry does not fix what that cost you." She stopped. She looked at her daughter. She looked back at Rachel. She said, "I do not expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I know exactly what I did." Rachel looked at her for a long moment. And then she said, "I know you do." And she meant it. That was not absolution. It was not reconciliation. But it was the truth, and the truth was the only thing left between them that had any value. They did not stay long. They did not need to. The conversation had done what it was supposed to do, which was not to restore the friendship but to acknowledge its ending in a way that was honest rather than just painful. Rachel paid for her coffee. She stood to leave. She looked at the baby one more time, at this small, unknowing person who had come into the world in the wake of the worst chapter of Rachel's life, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not warmth exactly, but something softer than what she had been carrying. Something that felt like the beginning of the possibility of setting it down. She walked out of the coffee shop into a bright Saturday morning, and she drove home, and she took her dog out, and she made lunch. She called Donna in the afternoon and told her how the meeting had gone. Donna listened and said, "How do you feel?" Rachel thought about it and said, "Like I finished something." Donna said, "Good." They talked for a while about other things. About Donna's kids and a renovation project and a book they had both been reading. Normal things. And Rachel found, as the afternoon settled into evening, that the normal things felt more available to her than they had in a long time. Rachel has been back in Columbus for just over a year now. She is back in the ICU, same hospital, doing the work she has always done well. She runs every morning, rain or shine, through the park near her apartment. She adopted a dog last spring, a 3-year-old beagle named Barley who has strong opinions about mealtimes and no patience for being ignored. She has dated a little, nothing serious yet, but she has been open to it in a way that feels genuine rather than forced, which she takes as a sign that she is actually healing rather than just performing the motions of it. She sees Dr. Osei every 2 weeks now rather than every week, which feels like forward movement. She does not have regular contact with Marcus. She does not have a friendship with Melissa. But she does not carry either of those losses as active wounds anymore. They are scars now, which is different. Scars are part of you. They do not bleed anymore. She said something in a therapy session recently that Dr. Osei told her she should write down. She said, "I used to think trust was something you gave people and either they honored it or they did not. Now I think trust is something you keep recalibrating based on what is actually in front of you. Not because people are untrustworthy, but because paying attention is part of how you take care of yourself." Dr. Osei said, "That is a significant shift." Rachel said, 3 years abroad and a destroyed marriage will do that." And they both, very slightly, smiled. This is not a story about how betrayal makes you stronger, because that framing is too simple and too convenient for the people who were not the ones who had to live through it. This is a story about a woman who came home expecting one life and found another, and who chose, with full awareness of what it cost her, to build something real from the actual ground up rather than spend herself on the wreckage of what was lost. That choice is not easy. It is not obvious. It is not the choice everyone makes. But it is the choice Rachel made. And the life she is building from it, slowly and on her own terms, is genuinely hers in a way that perhaps the life she lost never fully was. And now we want to end with you. Because this story belongs not just to Rachel but to everyone who has ever trusted someone completely and been surprised by what that trust was worth. Everyone who has ever come home, literally or figuratively, to find that the life they were protecting was not the life they thought they had. Everyone who has sat in the terrible quiet of a truth that arrived without warning and tried to find their footing in it. So tell us, in the comments below, what part of this story hit you the hardest. Was it the moment Rachel stood on that sidewalk and looked through the window? Was it the photo on the bookshelf? Was it the conversation in the coffee shop at the end? Or was it something else entirely, something in this story that connected to something in your own life that you have been carrying? Tell us. Be honest. Because when we talk about other people's pain with genuine honesty, we often end up finding the words for something we have been holding in ourselves for a long time, and that matters. That is worth something. And ask yourself this: if you were Rachel, standing outside your own house after 3 years away, looking through that window at the two people you trusted most in the world, what would you have done? Would you have walked in the way she did, steady and quiet, asking one question at a time? Or would the weight of it have been too much to hold that way? And what about her choice at the end, to put it down rather than carry the hatred forward? Is that something you could do? Is that something you would want to do? Or does a betrayal of this size feel like something that could only ever be carried, never set down? We genuinely want to know what you think. Drop your answer in the comments. Be honest. We read them. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real or think about something in your own life, please subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already done so. We tell stories here, real stories about real people navigating the most difficult and most human experiences that life produces. Stories about trust and love and loss and the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding. If that is the kind of content that speaks to you, you belong here. Hit subscribe and hit the notification bell so you are there when the next story comes out. Share this video with someone you think needs to hear it. Because sometimes the most important thing we can do for the people we care about is hand them a story that says, quietly but clearly, you are not alone in this. Whatever you are carrying, someone else has carried something like it. And they came through. And so can you. We will see you in the next one.